The repeated tripping of a heat trace breaker when operating a light switch suggests a few potential issues that need to be investigated. Firstly, there could be an electrical fault. This includes loose wires or connections at the switch itself, within the pull box, or even at the electrical panel. Also consider the possibility of damaged wiring insulation anywhere along the circuit's path. Overheating due to excessive current draw on the circuit could also be the culprit. Secondly, the breaker itself could be too sensitive. This means that the breaker might be rated for a lower amperage than the load it is currently carrying. A surge due to static electricity could also cause a sensitive breaker to trip, even though the current draw is normally within the breaker's rating. Thirdly, issues with the heat trace connections themselves could be the cause. Loose or faulty connections in the heat trace circuit can create a short circuit or a ground fault, both of which will trip a breaker. The heat trace itself might have a defect, leading it to overheat and consequently trip the breaker. Fourthly, consider the line voltage. If the line voltage is too high, it can overload the breaker and cause it to trip as a safety measure. Fifthly, it is also possible it could be a coincidence, though this is less likely given the repeat occurrences. To troubleshoot without immediately opening boxes, start by carefully inspecting the light switch and the pull box for any obvious signs of loose connections or visible damage. Next, test the light fixture by replacing the bulb and checking if the light operates normally without causing the breaker to trip. Use a voltage tester to check the voltage at the switch, the pull box, and the panel. Ensure that the voltage readings are within the correct and expected range. If the breaker trips again, try to observe what other devices are drawing power from the same circuit, such as other lights or appliances. This can help determine if an overload is causing the issue. If after these steps the problem persists, it is best to consult a qualified electrician for further diagnosis and repair. As an additional tip, consider installing a surge protector to mitigate voltage spikes if the heat trace breaker trips frequently. Make sure that the light switch is properly rated for the electrical load it is handling, and regularly inspect all electrical connections and wiring for any signs of potential problems. If the breaker is old, it may be worth replacing it with a new one of the same rating, as breakers can become more sensitive over time. When dealing with electrical systems, always prioritize safety and take the necessary precautions. Here's a deeper dive into each of these potential causes and how to approach troubleshooting them. Starting with electrical faults, systematically check every connection point within the circuit. Begin at the light switch in the 1110 box, carefully examining how the wires are connected to the switch terminals. Loose connections can create resistance, leading to heat buildup and potentially tripping the breaker. Ensure that all screws are tightened securely, but be careful not to over-tighten and strip the threads. From the light switch, trace the wiring back to the pull box. Open the pull box and inspect all the wire connections within it. Look for any signs of corrosion, discoloration, or loose wire nuts. If you find any compromised connections, clean and resecure them properly. Ensure that all wire nuts are the correct size for the number and gauge of wires they are connecting. Continue tracing the wiring from the pull box back to the electrical panel. Open the panel and inspect the connection of the circuit's wire to the breaker. Make sure the wire is securely fastened to the breaker terminal and that there are no signs of overheating or damage to the wire insulation. While inside the panel, also inspect the breaker itself for any signs of damage, such as cracks or discoloration. Damaged wiring insulation can cause short circuits or ground faults, both of which will trip the breaker. Carefully inspect all visible wiring for any signs of cuts, abrasions, or melting. Pay close attention to areas where the wiring passes through metal boxes or conduits, as these are common points for insulation damage. Overheating due to excessive current draw can also cause the breaker to trip. Check the amperage rating of the breaker and compare it to the total load of the circuit. To do this, identify all the devices and appliances that are connected to the circuit and add up their individual amp draws. If the total load exceeds 80% of the breaker's amperage rating, it could be a sign of an overloaded circuit. Now let's consider a sensitive breaker. Breakers are designed to trip when the current draw exceeds their rated amperage, but some breakers are more sensitive than others. If the breaker is old or has been subjected to frequent tripping, it may become more prone to nuisance tripping even when the current draw is within the acceptable range. In this case, replacing the breaker with a new one of the same rating may solve the problem. Static electricity can also cause a sensitive breaker to trip. When you flip the light switch, a small static discharge can occur, creating a voltage surge on the circuit. While most breakers are designed to withstand these small surges, a particularly sensitive breaker may trip. This is especially likely in dry environments where static electricity is more prevalent. Installing a surge protector on the circuit can help to mitigate the effects of static electricity and prevent nuisance tripping. Now we'll discuss the heat trace connections. Heat trace is an electrical heating system used to prevent pipes from freezing. If the heat trace circuit is not properly connected or if there is a fault in the heat trace itself, it can cause the breaker to trip. Carefully inspect all the connections in the heat trace circuit, looking for any signs of looseness, corrosion, or damage. Ensure that the heat trace is properly grounded and that there are no exposed wires. If the heat trace itself is damaged, it may need to be repaired or replaced. The line voltage should also be examined. If the line voltage is too high, it can overload the breaker and cause it to trip. Use a voltage tester to check the line voltage at the switch, the pull box, and the panel. The voltage should be within the range specified by the local electrical code. If the voltage is too high, contact the power company to have it corrected. Sometimes, the breaker tripping is a coincidence and not related to the light switch. This is less likely, but it is still a possibility. To rule out a coincidence, try flipping the light switch several times and see if the breaker trips consistently. If the breaker only trips occasionally, it may be due to some other factor. Here are some additional troubleshooting steps that you can take without opening boxes. Inspect the switch and pull box. Look for any loose connections or visible damage. If you see anything suspicious, contact a qualified electrician to investigate further. Test the light fixture. Replace the bulb and check if the light turns on without issue. If the light does not turn on or if the breaker trips again, there may be a problem with the light fixture itself. Use a voltage tester. Check the voltage at the switch, pull box, and panel to ensure it is within the correct range. If the voltage is too high or too low, there may be a problem with the electrical system. Monitor the breaker. If the breaker trips again, observe what else is drawing power from the circuit, for example, other lights or appliances. This can help you determine if an overload is causing the problem. It is important to consult a qualified electrician if you cannot identify the cause of the tripping. Electrical work can be dangerous, and it is always best to leave it to the professionals. They will have the knowledge and experience to diagnose the problem correctly and make the necessary repairs safely. Here are some additional tips to help you prevent breaker tripping in the future. If the heat trace breaker is tripping frequently, consider installing a surge protector to prevent voltage spikes. This can help protect your electrical system from damage and prevent nuisance tripping. Ensure that the light switch is properly rated for the electrical load it is handling. If the switch is underrated, it can overheat and cause the breaker to trip. Regularly inspect electrical connections and wiring for any potential issues. This can help you identify and correct problems before they lead to breaker tripping. When dealing with electrical systems, it's crucial to consider relevant electrical codes and standards. The National Electrical Code, also known as NEC, provides comprehensive guidelines for safe electrical installations. For example, NEC Section 310.15 addresses the allowable ampacity of conductors, which is essential to prevent overheating and potential fire hazards. Always consult the latest version of the NEC and local electrical codes to ensure that your electrical work is compliant and safe. One more item to consider is arc fault circuit interrupters, also known as ASIs. ASIs are designed to detect arc faults, which are dangerous electrical conditions that can cause fires. If the circuit in question is required to have an ASI, it could be tripping due to an arc fault condition. It might be helpful to check whether the breaker that is tripping is an ASI breaker. If so, it might be detecting an arc fault that needs to be addressed by an electrician. To summarize, start by identifying all possible causes, which could be loose connections, damaged wiring, an overloaded circuit, or a faulty breaker. Then, follow a systematic approach to narrow down the source of the problem. Begin with the simplest checks, such as inspecting the light switch and connections in the pull box. Use a voltage tester to verify that the voltage is within the proper range, and monitor the breaker to see if it trips repeatedly when the light switch is activated. If these initial steps do not reveal the issue, then move on to more advanced troubleshooting techniques, such as checking the heat trace connections and inspecting the wiring for any signs of damage. If you are not comfortable working with electrical systems, or if you are unable to identify the cause of the tripping, consult a qualified electrician. They can safely and accurately diagnose the problem and perform the necessary repairs to restore the circuit to proper working order. Remember to always prioritize safety when working with electricity. Turn off the power to the circuit before performing any inspections or repairs, and wear appropriate personal protective equipment such as insulated gloves and safety glasses. Also, double-check your work and follow all applicable electrical codes and regulations. Lastly, consider the age of the electrical system. If the wiring and components are old, they may be more prone to problems. In this case, it may be worth considering upgrading the electrical system to improve safety and reliability. An older breaker could be more sensitive than a newer breaker with the same rating. Replacing the breaker might be worth consideration. Here are the general steps to address this issue. Firstly, turn off the breaker that is tripping, then carefully inspect the light switch and the surrounding area for any signs of damage or loose connections. Secondly, tighten any loose screws or connections that you find. Thirdly, turn the breaker back on and test the light switch. Fourthly, if the breaker trips again, turn it off and consult a qualified electrician. They can help you diagnose the problem and make the necessary repairs. If the circuit is essential, like a fire alarm system, contact qualified technicians to repair the system. They will know the local city and NEC codes to keep the system safe and working. A faulty fire alarm system is a safety issue for the building.